Now let's come to the second and most important topic, group by and having clause. So what is group by used for? Group by is used to group data based on a column or set of columns. With group by, we can use aggregate functions. So when I say aggregate functions, what are the aggregate functions? We can do max, we can do min,
average,
we can do average, we can do count, and we can do sum. These are few of the aggregate functions which we can perform with a group by on a group of data. So when we add a group by, it will apply these functions to each of that group. And when we don't apply a group by, this max will apply for the all the records in a table. Right? So we'll see that. So with group by, we can use aggregate functions. One important note is all the columns which we are adding after group by clause should be part of the select clause. So any column that we are adding after a group by, let's say we have a group by keyword, then group by A, B, C. We are adding three columns A, B, C. So that three columns A, B, C should be part of the select statement also. So you should also have select A, B, C columns in the select statement. Without that, the group by will fail. So this point is very important. We need to keep in mind any column that we are adding after the group by clause should also be part of the select clause. So then with group by, we have a having clause. So having can only be used with a group by. Without group by, you cannot use a having clause. And what is having clause used? Having clause is used to filter results of an aggregate function. To filter the records from a table, we have the where condition, right? We use where condition to filter out records from the entire table. But to filter out the output of this aggregate functions like max, minimum, average, we use a having clause, which is a filter specifically defined for this kind of functions. So we can filter the output of these functions, and having can only be used with a group by clause. Without group by, you cannot use the having clause. So there is one interview question that comes up. People will ask you, can we use where and having clause in the same query? Because what is happening? Where and having both are filters. So where filters the data on a table level, having clause filters the data based on the output of this aggregate functions, and it can only be used with group by. So the answer for this will be yes, we can use both of them. And why we can use both of them is what we are going to discuss in some time. So first, let's see how group by works. So let's say I have this employee table, okay? And I'm writing a query here, select department ID from employee, group by department ID. So on what column I am making groups?
department ID.
So if we have data like this, so department ID 201, there are three records for 201, right?
Yes.
This three. So this three record will become one group. These two records will become one group, and these three records will become the third group. But what happens when I select this? Select department ID from employee group by department ID. So I'm only selecting department ID column in my query. So when I do a group by, it will take the unique department IDs as a group, because one group is for department ID 201. So it will display 201. Second group is for department ID 202. So it will display 202. The third group is for department ID 203. So it will display 203. Right? Because only 3 groups are there. So groups will form based on this column, which we mentioned here. And this is like take the unique values from this column, because one group for one department ID. So you get these values. And if you remember, this is similar to what we did with distinct. When we added a distinct department ID from employee, we got the same results, right?
Yes.
So this is how group by works. So if you group on some column, it will first form a group with the unique values in that columns, right? So with this group by, now we can do additional calculations. Like if I want to take maximum salary, now I'm adding a aggregate function maximum salary on a group formed by department ID. So first group is this, right? In this group, what is the maximum salary that we see?
3,000.
Yeah, so we will get 3,000. You see, even though we are getting the maximum salary, our record count is 1. Even though we have 3 records here, after group by, we are getting only 1 record. So 1 record per group.
Yes.
Okay. So for 202, the salary is 2,000. For 203, we have 6500. So this gives us the maximum salary. So similarly, we can apply other functions also. Let's say the count function. So let me take the count star, or to better understand, count of employee IDs to see how many employees are there in each department, right? So again, for this group, the count will come as 3. For this group, it will come as 2. And for the last group, it will come as 3. So what I mean to show you here is, even though we have 8 records in our employee table, when we form a group on department ID, it will first take the unique department IDs and print it out. So there are 3 unique department IDs. So we know there will be only 3 rows at the output. And then whatever aggregate you want to do, you can do that. So aggregate functions should be there in a group by. That is not important. But what is important is whatever column you are giving after group by, this department ID should be part of the select query. If I don't give it in select query, it will fail. So this is very important. So group by on a particular columns without any aggregate functions will give you the unique values for that columns. Like we saw here, if we just give department ID and group by department ID, it will give you 201, 202, 203, which is nothing but the distinct values for that column, right? So in case, if you have to find out distinct records from a table, it is always recommended to go with group by, because this.
Can we group by?
Hello?
Can we group by more than one column? Like
Yes.
department ID and employee ID.
So now you see this question, right? We have select department ID, employee ID from employee, and we are grouping by employee ID and department ID.
Yes.
What will be the output in this case? Can you give it a try?
Yes, please.
So what will be the output?
201 department ID 201, 202, 203.
No.
अरे सॉरी एम्प्लॉय आईडी भी ग्रुप बाय करना है.
हाँ, अब ये कॉम्बिनेशन बनेगा डिपार्टमेंट आईडी और ग्रुप बाई पे और एम्प्लॉय आईडी पे, राइट? सो अब देखना सारे कॉम्बिनेशन यूनिक है, तो ये बनेगा एक ग्रुप, ये बनेगा एक ग्रुप, क्योंकि डुप्लीकेट्स नहीं है. ग्रुप बाई ग्रुप करता है सेम सेट ऑफ डेटा को. अब इसमें क्या है कि कोई भी डुप्लीकेट रिकॉर्ड्स नहीं है, सारे यूनिक है, तो इसमें सारे आ जाएंगे. ठीक है, तो बेसिकली ये आपका जो डेटा सेट है, ये आपका आउटपुट आएगा, क्योंकि सारे यूनिक है, कॉम्बिनेशन यूनिक है, कोई डुप्लीकेट्स नहीं है यहाँ पे, राइट? एंड ये and this is similar to this query.
डिपार्टमेंट की एम्प्लॉय।
राइट। अगर आप ये लिखोगे तो भी आपको ये रिजल्ट मिलेगा, और आप ग्रुप बाय कर दोगे यही मिलेगा। अब इन केस अगर आप यहाँ पे काउंट ऐड करते हो, काउंट स्टार, तो ये सारे काउंट्स क्या आएंगे, 1 आएंगे, क्योंकि ये सारे ग्रुप में एक ही रिकॉर्ड है। राइट, कोई डुप्लीकेट्स नहीं है इस ग्रुप के। तो ग्रुप बाय ऐसा काम करता है। और जब आपको निकालना हो डिस्ट्रिक्ट रिकॉर्ड्स फ्रॉम ए टेबल, तो आप सारे कॉलम्स पे, टेबल के सारे कॉलम्स पे ग्रुप बाय कर दो। राइट, हम अभी एग्जांपल देखेंगे उसका, आपको ज्यादा क्लियर हो जाएगा। तो लेट्स सी सम एग्जांपल्स। तो आपको मतलब बेसिक ग्रुप बाय का फंडा समझ में आ गया। बेस्ड ऑन ए पर्टिकुलर ग्रुप वो यूनिक वैल्यू देगा। इस केस में सारे यूनिक थे तो सारे आ गए। अब अगर डुप्लीकेट होता, लाइक 10201 एक और होता और 101 होता, तो ये ग्रुप का वो काउंट 2 देता, डिस्प्ले एक ही करता। तो सर 2 रिकॉर्ड है, बट मैं डिस्प्ले एक ही करूंगा क्योंकि ग्रुप में यूनिक रिकॉर्ड देना है। तो ऐसे आएगा वो।